everyone for our next panel. That first panel was extraordinarily interesting, and kudos to the technical team for making that work. And then also a round of applause to Noah Tucker, I think, for going well above and beyond what we normally require of anyone moderating. I'd say I owe him a beer, but maybe a small car is more appropriate, given the amount of effort and work you put into that. So thanks for making that happening. So this is our second panel of the day, Rehabilitating and Reintegrating Extremist Offenders in the United States, what is being done. Okay, just so to introduce the panel, so we have Juncal Fernandez-Garyzabal. She serves as CEP's Development and Program Manager. Juncal is also a co-founder of Parallel Networks, which is a nonprofit organization set up to combat polarization, hate, and extremism in the U.S. Juncal gained professional experience researching conflicts, forced migrations, organized crime, and security. Her research has developed through collaboration in projects with institutions like Georgetown University, The Hague, Center for Strategic Studies, and UNICEF Madrid. Juncal also has gained hands-on experience in peace building while in Latin America and Africa, where she provided psychosocial support to internally displaced populations and other victims of extremism and violence in post-conflict settings. And since 2019, Juncal has been working to build the capacity of several countries, including the U.S., the Republic of the Maldives, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, to effectively rehabilitate and reintegrate individuals returning from conflict areas and those convicted for extremism-related offenses. Thanks, Juncal, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Bryant Viñas, welcome, Bryant, if you can still hear us.
Yes, I can hear you loud
Okay.
and clear. Thank you for having me.
Bryant was the first American to be recruited into al-Qaeda after 9/11. During his time in the Afghan-Pakistan border region between 2007-2008, Bryant encountered a variety of jihadi groups, was trained by al-Qaeda, and spent time with several of the group's most senior figures. After his arrest, Bryant started cooperating with U.S. authorities and contributed significantly to the near disappearance of al-Qaeda in the tribal areas of Pakistan. Since his release from incarceration, Bryant has shared his story and insights to advance the understanding of experts and the public alike on the ongoing issue of Western foreign fighters, as well as rehabilitation and reintegration of those convicted for terrorism-related offenses. Welcome, Bryant. As I mentioned, I believe you both have presentations. Juncal has slides. Brian, maybe you want to start with an overview of your view on the topic.
Sure. Juncal, where do you think the first subject I should talk about? There's several.
You know what you always talk about, and why I asked you to talk with us here today. You always ask the same questions, but for once, I'd like you to let everybody who's here today know what it actually is to come home after serving time for extremism-related offenses in this country.
Okay. During my time incarcerated, I was cooperating with law enforcement, U.S. and international, and I was under the impression I was going to get the witness protection program and start a new life with a new identity under the protection of the marshals. And maybe like 2 days before my release, I was told that that plan was on hold, and I wasn't really given a clear answer why. So I had to call my lawyer. He was on vacation, so I ended up calling my second lawyer, because I had two lawyers on the case. I told him what happened, and he was really surprised because no one was expecting this. So I got released. The probation department and the FBI, they set up where I stayed at a hotel while I waited for the appeal process to work out, and hopefully they would fix that problem. After a few months, my appeal was denied to get into witness protection, and I was kind of left hanging. You know, I had to start from the very bottom. The only thing I had was my prison ID, so I had to work on getting my Social Security card, to get on welfare, and food stamps, government health insurance. And then I went to a three-quarters house because I couldn't stay at a hotel anymore. and I started off 3/4 house. From there, I eventually got an ID with the help of my lawyer. He helped me get a New York State ID, and then from there, I went to an organization called Fortune Society, and they help people who have been released from incarceration get on their feet, help them with job interview skills so that they can better their chances at securing a good job. And I went through that program. They helped me get my asbestos licenses, and I eventually started off in the asbestos and lead paint removal field. So I had to get my career going in that direction in the beginning, and pretty much I started with nothing, and I had to little by little get to where I am today with that.
They're so. Thank you. But well, I have my own presentation, but I would really like if you get a second before we start the Q&A, because I'm sure everybody in the audience has 1,001 questions for you, not for me. Like you're the person here today. Just to talk a bit more in detail what it's been for you, with everything related to finding employment and the unstable housing situation and, the limitations that come along with your probation and all of that. Just if you could get into that. And then I'll ramble off.
Well, sure. Yikes. Well, I had a situation where nobody really knew what to do with me. And I know in the beginning there were a lot of people who didn't trust me, even though I really just wanted to be a very boring, guy just trying to get his life started again and leave my old life behind. So in the beginning, I had an ankle monitor. They wanted to track where I was going. I was only allowed maybe 1 hour a day to leave my hotel room, and eventually they let it be once a week. I was allowed to leave for like 3 hours, and I had to be back. And then eventually I had like a regular curfew, like from whatever. It could have been 8 in the morning till I don't know 6 in the afternoon. I don't remember exactly. It was something like that. So as I worked to stay out of trouble and I listened to my probation officers, they extended my time. And then when I got to the 3/4 house, they gave me like a big curfew. As long as I was looking for work, I was going to Fortune Society and I was going to classes. Eventually, I found a job washing dishes. So that job, restaurants. I mean, back then restaurants closed really late. This is before the pandemic, so restaurant would close at like 11 at night, midnight, and I get home at like 2 in the morning. But eventually they took off the ankle monitor. Oh, and I was going to a court mandated psych. That was another issue. Like once a week, I had to go see her. So just gaining their trust and staying out of trouble. They gave me that. Oh, they also put internet restriction on me in the beginning, and that's tough because in the beginning, I'm out and the world is different where almost nobody really does paper resumes or paper applications. They usually tell you to go online, go on the website and fill out their application through their website or an app. Sometimes they tell you to do it, and I didn't have that available. So sometimes I would ask my other lawyer, Carla, I would ask her if she could fill that out to me. So it was rough, and that's why I had a hard time getting a job because I had all those obstacles. But eventually, they loosened the internet restriction. They allowed me to have a smartphone, and I was able to get past all that through there. What was the other part of the question?
No, just to basically, give us indeed the overview of what though all the restrictions that you were mentioning with regard to the ankle monitor, the internet restrictions allowed to job, how this affected, for example, your housing situation, or even employment itself. Like if you actually did get a response for stuff, then comes the background checks, and at the same time, it's a condition of your supervised release to get a job, and they make it increasingly complicated for you to get a job for a bunch of reasons. So how all of that worked out.
Yeah, in the beginning, it was tough because if you're just trying to get just a basic job with no like special certifications or licenses, if you're just competing with the general public and you already have a criminal background that a lot of companies will check your name, there's already a big disadvantage. When I was able to wash dishes, then that they loosened up, they lightened up a little bit. And once I started working, in asbestos and lead removal, then they were happy because I was able to overcome that hurdle of the background check, but also that it was a decent paycheck too. So I was working that, and then when the pandemic hit, I was doing coronavirus cleaning in the nursing home, and then since I was working when I'm pretty sure like majority of New York City wasn't, my probation officer, she really told me, "Wow, I have a lot of respect for you, what you're doing. You're doing a very good thing." Because a lot of nursing homes have been hit hard with the coronavirus, with the elderly, and she really, from that day on, she's been so sweet and understanding and helpful to me, like to the max. So that was like another big turning point that I had working during the pandemic. And it's another thing, like a lot of people that were staying home, they were collecting the coronavirus checks. If you stayed home, and I wasn't doing that. I was going out and working. But yeah, I mean, right now I'm switching over to the plumbing field, and I already had a few issues where the boss checked my name, or they would ask my criminal background. I can't lie; I have to tell them the truth. So things started offline, but ended on a sad note with my path. So, but I recently found another company who hired me. I should be starting this week.
I know, congrats. Very happy about that. You know that.
You want to turn to your present? But Brian, if you wouldn't mind, if you'd stick with us, there's a lot of questions that the audience has for you. But if we could just pivot to Juncal, your presentation.
And Brian, as I present, I'm pretty sure that you're probably going to want to butt in with some examples. You and I have known each other for, I don't know, years now. How long has it been? 4 years, 5 years?
Oh man, since I went to the Spy Museum, I saw you. I don't remember the exact year. It was definitely before the pandemic.
It's been a long time. Darlene, can I get my slides? Oh, okay. I don't see them. Thank you so much, because I mean the reason why I wanted for you to speak today was not so much the sob story, or to criticize all the things that could have improved, but your case is a very particular one. I mean, your background story, Afghanistan, then coming back, cooperating with authorities, that's pretty unique. So I'm not surprised either, right, that, like you said, they didn't know what to do with you. That's it, But I think that your story in particular also serves to depict things that weren't done as great, but that thankfully now, we're trying to improve upon, and that we've picked up on, and we're trying to do our best, to improve situations like people like yours. Maybe not as hardcore, but still people that come home from prison after serving time for extremism-related offenses. And so that's another thing I wanted to publicly thank you, because it's because of you and other people in your circumstances that we, came about with the idea of, alternative pathways, which is our attempt was to put together the first program in the United States that actually built in-prison support for extremism-related offenders and bridged that to post-release support. And it was thanks to DHS funding that we've been working at this for the past 2 years, a little over. And as I say, I'm going to just present the program a little bit, and there's areas where you might actually want to butt in as I move forward. Can I change this myself? There we go. Yes. So as I was explaining, Alternative Pathways was meant to bridge in-prison support to post-release services for people convicted for extremism-related offenses. Why this particular people population? Well, because of people like Brian, right? Because it's, well, first of all, you have the constant question of whether, prisons, are they radicalization hubs? And this, of course, it's even worse when, there's the problem of white supremacy in prisons. And I know there's people from the BOP in the audience today, so maybe, they're very well aware of what I'm talking about. And especially the post-release support, right? When people come home, when their socioeconomic situation is difficult, they have the added stigma, they have the social isolation, the inability to get employment, stable housing. So what do we do? And most importantly, we were very well aware, well, this is a case-by-case basis. How do we tailor programs to each person and their very specific circumstances as they come home? So what we developed is the Alternative Pathways Workbook. It's a 10-session workbook that speaks about, all the topics that have been identified normally in the literature as, the risk factors for radicalization. There was a mental health component, or that trauma-informed care. There's also speaking about gender, and misogyny and how that affects conspiracy theories. So we touch upon all these different topics throughout, as I was saying, 10 chapters. And the idea was to deliver this workbook both reaching out to extremism offenders across the country via written correspondence, and also in prison, in person, with this very specific population. I cannot, unfortunately, talk about the delivery of this program in prison, since one of the challenges, and I think that's worth it. Sarah, don't laugh. One of the main challenges was actually implementing this program in person, but that is a completely different conversation that we're not going, maybe later we can have. And as we worked with people on these 10 different sessions, this allowed us to actually get a sense of who these people are, what motivated them to join, where they are now, and what is it that they are, what does their post-release situation look like? Where are they at ideologically? What support do they have? Do they have any kind of support? What are their expectations? What are their hopes when they come back? And how do we actually transform this to positive pro-social connections when they leave the prison system? So the whole workbook was based on a theory of change that we put together. And the goal, essentially, of the whole program was to ensure that people coming home in the United States with extremism-related offenses had a safe, healthy, and dignified transition into the community. We avoided language such as, de-radicalization, disengagement, because they're in and of themselves controversial. And I think that if you were to ask, for example, me, what I understand, rehabilitation, reintegration, derad, maybe I'll probably give a very different response to that of Bryant. Simply for who we are, our life experiences, and our expectations, right? So safe, healthy, and dignified reentry back into the community, and of course, make it sustainable. And so, well, I'm actually very happy that we're able to put this conference here today, because the first goal of that theory of change was, well, if we get all the right actors in the right place and we get them all on the table, how does this help? Because one of the problems that we identified is everybody's doing their own thing. You have, the prison system on the one hand, probation on the other, and the courts and the cops and then the community organizations. Everybody actually plays a role in this process, but there seems to be an apparent lack of coordination. So how do we move this forward? And of course, the individual at the end of the day is the center of the person coming back, is the center of it. And we did focus on the mental health aspect of it, but not, and my colleagues here today will speak more in depth about that today, not to medicalize, radicalization, not to draw a direct link between trauma and radicalization, none of that, but, the definition of well-being. What does it mean to be okay? Not for me, not for the person doing the program, but for the person who's on the receiving end of it and who's going to be the person going back to the community, who's going to be labeled as. I don't know what it is to be labeled as, but the people that we've been working with definitely know. And of course, we spoke about employment. We're speaking with Brian. When the conditions of your supervised release are, you need to get a job, but you can't get a job. How do you move forward? Family, who is supposed to be your main support? Do you have that support? And if not, what do we do? And of course, we also, stigma, yes, sorry, I can't see the slides. Stigma, indeed, what effects does it have? Not just in all the other spheres that we've spoken about, but for you as an individual to be labeled as, or to continuously being labeled as. I remember very clearly the first day I met Brian in person. It was at an event at the Spy Museum. And as I was headed to the Spy Museum, it was impossible to get out of that parking lot, and somebody yelled at me from the back of the parking lot, "Hey, excuse me, are you going to see the terrorist?" Exactly, I guess I am, right? And that was, I hadn't even interacted with Brian ever in my life. And that lady who I'd never met either was, "Are you going to see the terrorist?" Doesn't matter that he cooperated with authorities, doesn't matter that he's there to talk about a series of things, he's still a terrorist. So what does that do to you, and what are the implications of that? And of course, monitoring and evaluation. Liz, you mentioned that during your introduction. How do we gather sufficient information from all of those areas to see what could actually work? But not just what could work, for whom, in what circumstances, how? And if we're speaking about sustainability, for how long, right? And so, well, in numbers, very briefly, we were, oh my God, I do need to, I don't remember the numbers out of the top of my head, but I do remember that we reached out to, we identified 295 individuals. Over half of them were Islamic extremists in prison. And the overall response, thank you. That is super. That's what I need. And indeed, of those contacted, we were able to actually reach 165 individuals. And what I mean by actually reach is that we never got the envelope returns, that there wasn't any issue. 165 people, 59% of them Islamic extremists, 41 right-wing. And we actually successfully engaged a decent number of them, 75% of them being, Islamic extremists, and 10 people completed the actual workbook. So, I mean, it's not huge data, but, it's something that we can definitely work with. So, indeed, that is what we set out. That's what we set out to do, to create this ecosystem of actors where everybody involved at every level of the resocialization, rehabilitation, reintegration process, however we want to call it, was aware of that the person was coming home, who of these people were able to provide some form of support, and who might, sometimes be a bit reluctant because of the issue of trust that Brian was speaking about. And as I was saying, as we dealt with these 10 sessions, we were also able to engage in actually pretty personal conversations at a given point, because it's not just the written correspondence. You get the phone calls, you get, you actually develop a human relationship with the person on the other end. And they do tell you a lot. They do tell you a lot more than you would actually think that they tell you. And so that also allows to see what well-being is, where they're actually at. Do they need connected to specialized services? As I say, I don't want to, this is not my area of expertise, and I have a wonderful panel coming up this afternoon to speak about mental health. But from the results, clearly that the majority of people actually what they needed is basic psychosocial support, just activating pro-social positive networks that allowed them to, quote unquote, be normal, quote unquote, as early as possible, as quickly as possible, and as easily as possible, and only a short percentage of them actually showing signs. Again, I'm not a clinician, so I wouldn't be able to, make a formal diagnosis, but showing signs that they would require some form of mental health support. And as I was saying, the individual, right, is at the center of all of this, and the first activated was the basic psychosocial support. How do we ensure that there's some form of pro-social network? Whom of the identified stakeholders need to be part of this? And of course, then that takes us to social and educational, right, level, which is, okay, there we go. So, because, you know, as when we were writing the When Terrorists Come Home reports, you know, having a job is indeed one of the best ways to reintegrate somebody into society. But how do you do it given the limitations, right? So what we did is we tried to take an approach based on these conversations that, you know, how do you fulfill the person's needs, but also, you know, overcome the reality, the harsh reality of the background checks. And what we also tried to do is when implementing the risk, needs, and responsivity model, whom I know the folks from prison will be very familiar with, is not just to get them into a routine, not just to make them financially independent, but also, you know, develop a sense of self-esteem, you know, social competence. I can actually contribute despite my background. I can actually contribute, be part of the society once again. And, you know, self-realization, self-efficacy. Of course, for that, we took an assets-based approach. We can talk about this more during the Q&A. And, of course, when finding a job, you know, it always came up, the strength of weak ties, the friend of a friend, getting you jobs, and how does all of this work? And we actually realized that it was mostly family members, close family members, that people were going to rely upon, at least when getting out, and you know, oh, well, my cousin knows somebody and they might, you know, get me a job, or I spoke to my uncle, wherever it was, and I can get maybe a job when I get out. And indeed, a lot of the times, you know, family did act as this pro-social influence, providing socioeconomic supports and acting, of course, as bridges, you know, with the broader community. But another issue that I didn't get a chance to ask during our first panel is what happens when the family is actually a risk factor? Like, what do you do when... And it doesn't mean, you know, like the family actively contributed to the person's radicalization process, but what if there is indeed a long history of trauma for that individual and it comes from an adverse childhood experience? Are you actually going to put them back in that situation? And what if that family is the only source of support that they have at that moment, right? So all these questions that make you realize not what we're doing wrong, but, you know, areas that we should, of course, try to understand and try to put an important focus on, because, as I'm saying, it's usually the first source of support that people have. And the last area, of course, was how do we decrease community resistance and reduce stigma, right? And unfortunately, none of the people who completed the program have been back in the community for long enough to actually me say, oh, you definitely know this or that. But we did realize that the more a person was able to develop pro-social behaviors, anger management, and all of that, the better response that they were having in their day-to-day interactions. And of course, that also allowed them to gradually, you know, try to be less of and again, my colleagues will explain this afternoon, less in a fight, flight, freeze mode, like relaxing, and also changing their overall worldview attitudes towards the community, right? That is what we did indeed start seeing as the program progressed. And hopingly, you know, the approach that we were taking is how all this trajectory from in prison to the post-release, by involving all the actors, it was the only way that we would be able to get a holistic and actually 360-degree view of what the process looks like. And as I started this whole thing, right, what works for whom and what circumstances have for how long will definitely vary, but only by involving everybody at each stage of this whole process will we be able to actually understand. And we're all here because at the end of the day, policy making, legislation, and all of that, well, the model proposed, at least for now that we're working with towards, is indeed at least evidence-based legislation, evidence-based policies. So that will be for me today, for now at least. And please, David,
Good.
just yeah.
No, it's very, very interesting, and thanks for taking us all through that. I think, and I'm interested in hearing, Brian's reaction to that, or the audience's reaction to that. But kind of just going up from a, more of a general question, but with a very specific target to kind of get a different viewpoint on this. I mean, there's a lot of practitioners, experts, academics here. We're talking a lot about reintegration, rehabilitation. I'm curious, Bryant, what you would consider to be, a successful rehabilitation and reintegration, as someone who's, gone through this process. It may be the same, from what we all think, but maybe for you, we have a unique kind of specific viewpoint about what that would actually mean to be successfully rehabilitated and reintegrated.
Sure. I guess the first step is having a good attitude. Juncal brought up, it really depends on your own self motivation, on a case by case basis. If you're going to be bitter and just with a bad attitude, you're not going to get very far. So first, it starts with yourself. It starts with how determined you are to be successful, and most importantly, leaving your past behind you and moving forward. So it starts with that. If you have a good family support system, obviously that helps a lot. At the time, I wasn't in communication with anybody from my family. But a few years after I got released, I reached out to my father and my older brother, and I have open line of communication with them. Things are very good. I think another issue would be, staying low key. That's another thing. Like I was in the beginning, I was offered a lot of interviews, and I didn't really want to jump in front of the camera, just anything. Eventually, I did 60 Minutes because they had a good reputation. They were very professional. But I wasn't jumping in front of every camera and microphone, like certain people. But uh, you know, just staying low key. Um, Getting certifications is another big thing because you're competing with other people for the same job opening. So what separates yourself from the average person on the street is, licenses and certifications. So I had a good support system in the Fortune Society. I think they're a great organization. They open up their doors to everybody. Doesn't matter what your charge is. I mean, I know they don't get a lot of Al Qaeda cases. I think I was probably the first one, but because I went in and I was quiet and stuck to doing whatever work they gave us to do, good attendance, arriving on time. I blend in, and nobody really knew who I was until later on. When I went on 60 Minutes, then they knew who I was. But having a support system where there may be a nonprofit organization that helps people out, I think that's a big plus. Trying to think what else is a good thing. Getting any type of work experience, even if it's something humble like washing dishes and learning how to be social, because when you're in prison for a long time, it's that type of interaction in that environment. You have to like reprogram yourself once you get out if you do a long bid. So being in regular civilian life again, I think starting with a low level job is good. Learning how to interact with coworkers before you make the jump into like a better field, a better paying field. I think that's a good advice. Okay, what else do we talk about? I might be
I
forgetting
don't know
something.
what you consider a successful process,
But I would say, Juncal, that seems to comport
Yes.
with what you're saying about it's the individual being reintegrated, positive mindset, willing to work, but then also the
Yes.
context in which they're being integrated, which is a
Absolutely.
support system and access to psychosocial tools
Absolutely,
and support.
and I like Brian and I have been go back for many years, and Brian, I think you like as your process has evolved, as the longer you've been out. I mean, your social network is good. Your social support, like right? I think that's also something positive that has been, positively constructed over the years. So that's another thing that definitely I would consider something, a successful sign of rehabilitation and reintegration, that development and expansion of positive connections in the community, definitely.
And I'm sure there's questions from the audience, but before we do that, and Bryant, I would want to also know, when you were incarcerated, and putting aside the discussions you had about witness protection and the path that offered you, if you had been offered a program such as this, rehabilitation, reintegration focus, something along the lines of what Juncal has described, and I'm sure you've talked about it, and you've actually spoken about it at different meetings with Juncal for a long time, would you have participated in such a program at the time, if it was offered?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I would have at a minimum considered it. Having that option there is great. When I got out, I didn't have anything. When I was imprisoned in the witness security unit that I was in, they didn't have any vocational training. The only type of education they really had was GED, but I already graduated high school, so there was nothing available there. So I definitely would have looked into seeing what type of organizations had something to offer to better myself. So absolutely, I would have definitely looked into it, and if I liked it, I most likely would have accepted it.
I think we should move on to questions. I don't know if there's anything from the audience. I think we do have a few. My colleague Alan has the mic. Alan, over here.
Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. Overseas, our assistance is predicated on knowing when that moment is that there's a separation from your past and your reintegration process. And so my question is really about how you track changes in attitudes and behaviors through this process, so you can, there's maybe not a moment where you solemnly swear that you are no longer engaged in, right, in negative activity, but how is it set up to know that moment? And these two processes are almost, we know this, right, that they're mutually exclusive. On the one hand, we need that clarity, and on the other hand, it's an ongoing process whereby people are continuing to evolve. So we have to square that circle in order to support this work, both domestically and internationally. So what are your recommendations for thinking through that quandary?
So I think this goes back to the network of actors, the ecosystem of actors that I was talking about, because at least in our experience, right, one can be a great interventionist and be able to have, those theological discussions, and at a given point one says, well, rhetoric, so what the person is telling me actually matches what they're doing, seemingly, right, which is a great indication of things are going in the right direction. However, we're all human, right? What I mean, and we're all open, we're all vulnerable to, for example, deception. One needs to admit their own limitations. So of course, programs like this cannot occur in isolation, cannot occur in silos. Like people at the BOP, they have the behavioral analysis unit. They're also able, to track those changes in ideology, changes in behavior. But again, we may be aware, or we may be having conversations with them, with people coming home, that are much more personal, much more intimate than, what you may be tracking from written correspondence in a jail cell, from, phone calls, whatever, right? So it is this mutually reinforcing and necessary relationship between, as I was saying, everybody involved at each stage, that you can actually get a complete picture. Are actions matching behavior? I wish I had like a very specific answer, like, listen, there's this tool that is absolutely fantastic, no fail, just go ahead and use it. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I think it's more than clear that radicalization is, especially when radicalization to violence in this case, is not just a matter of ideology, and you solve the ideology and everything works. There's been an ideology that has transitioned into action. Therefore, we're speaking about actions, we're speaking about ideas. Do they match? Yes. Do I know with 100% certainty that they match? I don't know. That's why, we're advocating for let's everybody who's involved, chip in and actually let us figure out how things are going.
Yeah, can I chip in on that?
Yes, go ahead. That's what you're here for too.
Okay. Uh, like in my case, for example, when I was in prison for a little under 9 years, I only got one write-up, one shot. And if people looked into that, it was because I walked away from the unit manager at the time. She was trying to argue with me, and I just walked away from her. She said I was insolence. That I was ignoring her. But that was because I didn't want to engage in the argument. So you have to look at the person's track record in prison, and you have to see what their behavior is like afterwards when they get released. Like if what they're saying doesn't match what their record is, like if they're pretending to be somebody that they're not, exaggerating how tough they were and all that stuff, you gotta that's a big warning flag. Like for example, I'm always downplaying what I did. People think I'm like this big Rambo guy when I was over in Afghanistan, and I wasn't. And I was a very low level guy. I'm not trying to be somebody that I'm not. Um, and unfortunately, not everybody's like that. So a good indicator of how to judge somebody is what was their prison conduct like, and what is their post prison. Um, I guess how do they project themselves when they got out of prison? Because like I said, I always have to deny a lot of the exaggerations that are or the caricatures that are made about me. So that's a big plus if you do that.
Thank you so much for. Is that working? Oh, you're holding it. Okay, sorry. What do you? How can I say this? Was there ever a time, like, what would have been something that pushed you back? That wasn't being positive. Like, was there any time where something that you weren't getting in a program, or something specifically that would have caused you to not, to get out of the program and go back?
Do you mean something that would risk me getting arrested again?
Maybe, or saying, you know what, I, you know, I had a better life before. Like what, something. Okay, something that would derail you. Like what, and what, could have been done or was done to keep you on the path.
Well, I got sabotaged a few times by my own FBI agent, where I was supposed to work with West Point Academy. I was supposed to, at least get some interviews with certain people, and he told them not to, either him or his supervisors, whatever, told them not to work with me. So I had chances where I could have greatly used my past to do something positive, and it didn't happen. So I mean, that's really discouraging when the guy who's supposed to be helping you is sabotaging. But I didn't let that get to me, because my personal attitude is I'm never going back to prison again. There's no way. I'm not going to put myself in a position. And here in New York City, there are people who, just day-to-day life might try to test you. Like if I'm riding my bicycle and some idiot comes out and gets in your way because he's chasing a ball, he didn't look both ways before he crossed into the street, and you almost crashed into him. That's a situation where you could fight somebody. But because I don't want to go to prison, I let it go and I keep on going. It's just one example that happened to me recently. Or, there's, situations like you're in Fortune Society, and it's an open environment for people who've done prison time. You have that energy where somebody else, may want to test you, whatever, and you just got to let it go. So your own personal individual attitude of I'm always going to stay positive no matter what happens. I'm going to keep moving forward. If one door closes, I'm going to keep going, looking for another door to keep going. So it's my own personal determination to try to be as successful as I can.
Brian, congratulations that you're reformed and living well.
Thank you.
I'm wondering how much religion plays a role, because I'm assuming that wanting to go into Al Qaeda and be a foreign fighter had something to do with believing a distorted, hijacked version of Islam. And I've worked a lot in prisons, and we've seen people that, with our sheikh, we have a really good Islamic scholar on our staff, and we've seen that when we go in together and talk to somebody and reach them, that if we disabuse them of the ISIS Al Qaeda version of Islam, that it really helps them to blossom and grow and stay on a straight and narrow path. And I'm wondering how much that was a factor for you, if at all. And also, what you just said, I'm never going back to prison. We've talked to jihadists not in prison that said, I would do an act of suicide because I'm never going back to prison, and I believe that will take me straight to paradise. So I'm just wondering if you could comment on the whole religious issues as far as how it played out for you. Thank you.
All right. I love when I get multi-layered questions, because I always forget all of them when I start answering one. So if I forget the other two or three that you brought up, please, I'm gonna ask you to refresh in my memory. All right. Um, on the last one where you're like, people they say I'm not going to prison because they may do a suicide bombing. I was there already on the other side, and I already saw how ugly war is. I already see how there's so much political corruption and tribal problems between different groups and government involvement, where they, like for example, the Pakistani ISI, they encourage young people to join jihad, but really they're doing the dirty work, destabilizing a certain region for their benefit. So my experience seeing all of that makes me different than some guy who's just looking for his way to do some violence or try to be successful on the battlefield. Like, I've been there and I've done that. And my personal my personal journey is that many people in my situation don't get a second chance at life. And I was given one. My judge, who was very good to me, uh, he put his faith and his trust in me and my lawyer that I'm going to do the right thing. There's so many people that I don't want to disappoint, myself included. I don't want to end up back in prison, because there is no third chance for me. This is it, and I'm determined not to go back to prison for many reasons, but specifically for that one. Okay, so you asked some other questions. What were the other ones again?
Are you still Muslim, and
Yes.
how much did religion play in your rehabilitation?
Uh, yes, I'm still religious, but I just pray, stay away from pork and alcohol, and that's pretty much it. I'm very relaxed, very liberal. I'm not as dedicated as I was before. And as far as how my religion was part of my decision to go overseas, I mean, I think it's 90%. Um, there were a lot of teachings where if you're young, you have no kids, you have no wife, there should be obligation to go fight. Um, and obviously, I followed that. As far as my religion now, like I said, I'm a lot more laid back. I do once in a while go to see an imam in the Bronx. His name is Sheikh Musa. I don't remember his last name, but he's done a lot of work with New York City, being like the Muslim voice of opinion when it comes to um, political situations in the city. He's a great person, big hearted, big hearted man, and he's always offered to help me if I need any help, anything that's within his power. He knows my story, and he's just a wonderful brother that I talk to once in a while. Thing is, since I live in Queens, and his prayer service is in the Bronx, it's hard for me to go there, especially on Fridays. A lot of times I'm working, Um, but we do keep in touch once in a while. I don't like to go too much time where we don't talk. Uh, and he's a good brother. If there was ever a situation where I had to recommend a jihadi trying to get his life back on track when he gets out, I would probably recommend this man. You know what? After this is done, I'm gonna look for his information and give his information to Juncal in case that scenario ever happens. You know, which I'm pretty sure will.
Thanks, Bryant. Are there any other questions we have for Bryant or Juncal or anything online?
Yep. This is in from our online audience, which sort of relates to what you were just speaking about, Brian. What's one unexpected thing that you value in your daily life that, if you had known was possible while incarcerated, or even just upon release, would have given you more hope in the future? So, what is it right now that you value that would have gotten you through had you known that it was at the end of the tunnel?
Ooh, man, that's tough. Good employment. I think because when you're in high school, you get hammered a lot. Go to college, go to college. But I know a lot of guys that went to college and they dropped out and they were stuck with this big debt that they had to pay off. And, college wasn't really for everybody, but they hammer it into you like it is. I think you could get really good work doing blue collar jobs. You may not have to do 4 years or 6 years of college, and maybe you might do a few months at a trade school. And New York City, with the good thing about getting into construction is you don't really have to deal with background checks. So that was a big plus. But even regardless, even before, I think good employment helps a lot. I was struggling a little bit financially, and I had a bad back injury. I was able to rehab a lot of it. Oh, I'm sorry. There's a truck for some reason backing up. Give me a second
Okay,
for
it's
this.
New York City. Sounds the same.
We can still hear you. You're good.
It's beeping to go away. No, but it's annoying to me. Give me a second. Almost done. Can you hear the backup beep?
Yeah. Yes.
All right, he's gone.
Yeah, he got it. Yeah.
Yeah. So good employment. How to get good employment. Trying to think what else. I think that's probably the biggest thing, just so that you don't struggle economically. There's a lot of good opportunity. Trying to get to New York City, because when you're out in the suburbs, you need a car, and without a car, it's really difficult to get around. When you're in a big city, you can take the public transportation, the bus, the subway, and get from point A to point B with just a metro card. So that's a big plus too.
Brian, I want to interact real quick, and apologies if there are any more questions, but the fact that you were speaking about living in a big city and whatnot, the anonymity the big city gives you, that might be a bit more complicated in smaller areas. And is that something that you value and that, is something that is a plus on your everyday life? I mean, New York is not, I don't know, God knows where.
No, absolutely. It gives you a chance to blend in better, to lay low. Like I said, there's so many things that are just a right away. You don't have to have a car and go 20 minutes just to do something so simple. Here, you can get from point A to point B easily, and you're just another face in the crowd. And there's so many people. That's a big plus.
Good. I think we're going to wrap up there, Brian. Thank you very much for your participation and
Thank you, Beep.
contributions.
Thank you. I just want to give a shout out to Noah and Glory Bell. Great people. And I really love the work that everyone's doing to help people in my situation. I think it's a great thing, and over the years, this is going to be very impactful. A lot of people who are coming out with charges to my category. So thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Brian,
Thank
for all your
you.
good work and contributions. We appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day. And
Okay,
thanks
you
to
too. Bye.
Juncal as well. We're going to transition directly to the next panel now
Sure.
at 12 o'clock. Just a reminder, this panel will not be live streamed and conducted under Chatham House rules.